Hello there and happy Friday if you're listening on Friday or whenever you are. Thank you very much for pressing play. I've got two great guests joining me on today's podcast. They are Bill Boyle in Washington, D.C., Bill B. in D.C., and the president of the Florida Education Association, my good friend Andrew Spar. I didn't say that Bill was my good friend. I realized that. Both these guys are really good friends of mine that are joining me on the show today, and they are both brilliant, and I'm very happy to round out the week or the last episode of the week with them. And oh, what a week it has been, folks, of guests here on Stand Up and in the news and life. But my Lord, Anya Kamenetz and Dave Rothkopf yesterday, Virginia Heffernan and Wajid Ali the day before that, and comedians Jay Black, Noel Kasler, Eric Siegel, and, of course, all week, Pete Coe. It's been great. Thank you very much for your subscriptions, those of you who are paying. If you're not, sign up now so I can keep pumping out these great conversations with some of the most brilliant people in the country and beyond. And speaking of those that do pay for subscriptions, many of them, over 50, I think, showed up last night at our hangout, and we had a riot. Almost 3 hours we were hanging out virtually, which is why today's episode, and often on Fridays, I'm a little late because I stay up late with my friends. Really interesting, fun, poignant, funny as always. And I'm going to share with you the reactions that listeners, subscribers, people who were hanging out last night had to the student loan forgiveness decision that was made by Democrats and President Biden. And I should say it was perpetuated or inspired by activists and angry people who had been screwed over for years. So I want to give them credit as well. But had a great conversation and taped that, and I'm going to share it at some point, either later today as a separate episode, or I'm going to drop it at some point in the next 24 hours. So look out for that. We had a great time, and I'm very happy to share that with you as well. But right now, I want to get right to today's guests. Before I play my conversation with Andrew Spar and then Bill Boyle, I just got to give you this audio of Trey Crowder, one of the liberal rednecks. You guys know Trey Crowder. He's been on the show before. You're probably a pretty big fan of him and his work. He's absolutely brilliant guy. And I just wanted to play this 3 minutes for you to get us started because I think it's inspiring and it's hilarious and it's awesome. And he shared this video on Twitter at his account, which is just Trey Crowder. And here is his take on the long-awaited student loan forgiveness news. And I kind of tongue-in-cheek quoted around his video when I tweeted it. I just wrote, "I despise how brilliant and funny this all-in-one-take motherfucker is." All 3 minutes of this commentary are gold. Let it rip, Trey.
Well, the Biden administration continues its recent and novel trend of doing stuff by announcing a federal student loan forgiveness program. Not everybody's happy, though. A lot of bitching from the right. A lot of talk out there like, oh, okay, so now taxpayers got to bail out these lazy, entitled millennials who regret the decisions they made while pursuing their degree in cat studies. Is that it? Well, if you'll allow a personal retort, I'm a millennial. I worked 30 hours a week through college, made straight A's, and got an MBA. I followed every one of your rules to the letter, and I still graduated with a mountain of student loan debt. Why? A, because the system is rigged and predatory, and B, because I was also a money-dumb trailer baby, bereft of financial literacy, who once signed up for 3 credit cards in exchange for 3 medium one-topping pizzas. This just in, college kids sometimes make poor decisions. It's arguably the whole point of being a college kid. But that's not all they're saying. A lot of talk out there today like, I worked my ass off for years to pay off my student loans. Now they just get off scot-free. How is that fair? Well, as someone who also paid off their student loans, I love this program because I, A, understand how much it sucks to have student loans, and B, am not a selfish asshole. I really don't understand this mentality. My dad died of pancreatic cancer. If they announced a miracle cure tomorrow, I'm not going to take to Twitter like, oh, okay, so all these entitled cancer havers out here today just get to go on being alive, huh? Is that how things work in Joe Biden's America? Okay. I would like to think that experiencing a form of suffering yourself would make you more sympathetic to those in a similar plight instead of being resentful of them when they are relieved of it. But what do I know? I never read the Bible or nothing. Also, there's the cynicism of, y'all know this is just a political bargaining chip, right? Midterms right around the corner. You think that's a coincidence? No, I don't. And also, hell yeah. You mean they're doing stuff and trying to win? It must be my birthday. Also, you ever notice how when Democrats offer a political bargaining chip, it's something that actually helps millions of Americans? But if Republicans were going to do the same, it'd just be stuff like, yeah, I promise them we'll burn even more books and make trans kids cry even harder. That ought to get the base going. Like, I'll take these chips all day. Thank you very much. And I think the dumbest thing I saw came from, of course, Jim Jordan, who said this program just benefits the wealthy elites. I feel like if you asked your average wealthy elite what they think of student loans, they're going to go like, what is that? Is that where like a school loans you a student to be your slave at the office for a while? Because, yeah, I love that shit. That's great. Like, this ain't for them. The fuck are these people talking about? But it don't matter. All their bitching ain't going to change anything. They're just mad because they're watching their narrative of the do-nothing Biden administration crumble before their very eyes, and I, for one, am here for it. Love y'all.
So good. So good. That is like the fourth time I've heard it, and I might listen to it a couple more times, and I'm definitely going to reach out to Trey Crowder to get him on this here podcast next week. Go tell him I said hi. Okay, well, let's get to my guests joining me today. Coming up, I love talking to Bill Boyle. I love talking to the guy about just about anything, but I love when I press record and he starts sharing what he thinks is knowledge on things, on anything. Super smart guy. You're going to love my conversation. We talked for almost an hour. That is coming up. Before that, I have the president of Florida's biggest teachers union, the Florida Education Association. Actually, the state's largest association of professional employees. He's born and raised in the suburbs of New York. He's a product of our public schools. He was a very talented young violinist. Got a bachelor's degree from The Ohio State University, which he never hesitates to let us know, including in today's conversation. Somehow he ended up in Florida, in Daytona Beach, to teach at an elementary school where 90% of the students there lived in poverty. And he went from a music teacher to being a voice, an advocate, and has worked ever since on behalf of public school students, schools, teachers, and education staff professionals. He's brought me down there to do comedy and moderate talk and speak to all of these amazing people. Many times I've gotten to know the people that Andrew represents and works with, and a shout out including Carol Garanskas, who is the vice president of the Florida Education Association, also a listener and subscriber here. So she's one of the amazing people that I also have gotten to meet through Andrew, who's opened a lot of doors and introduced a lot of amazing people to me. All right, so we had a great conversation about what the hell's going on in Florida with their teachers, their schools, and their politics. We talked 2 days ago, so I don't think we talked about the student loan forgiveness issue. We might have. My conversation with Andrew Spar, then Bill Boyle coming up. Here we go. Let's do it. Thank you for noticing, Andrew Spar, the shed redecoration. I really, a lot of people haven't noticed. Everybody noticed. But thank you for saying that. You like it.
Yeah, there's a lot of books there, Pete. I'm thinking you're trying to make people think you're smart.
A good friend of mine, David Campbell, he might be listening. He said, why don't you give some of those books away so other people can read them? And I said, then because people then won't know how smart I am. They're all there.
Listen, in the state of Florida, I'm just going to say, in the state of Florida, teachers have books all over the place, right? And now they're being told you can't use your books, so you can't share
good
books
segue.
Anymore. It's not allowed in the state of Florida anymore.
Maybe we can start. I mean, I obviously want to talk with you about, well, a lot of things dealing with what you're dealing with every day. It's primary day there in Florida, but because you mentioned it, it's a bigger issue than just books. But talk to me about the censorship movement in your state, from the governor, everybody knows now, Ron DeSantis, all the way down to anybody else that matters that's on board. And it's not just books. I mean, it's curriculum. It's who can be in the classroom, who can't maybe. What are we talking about in terms of Florida schools and government controlling what they get to read, much less anything else? Censorship in Florida.
Yeah, so let me start with, though, I don't want to lose it in the context of what's going on even broader and what's it causing here in Florida, right? So last year, at the start of the school year in Florida, we had about 5,000 teacher vacancies. This year, we started with 8,000 plus teacher vacancies.
Jesus.
Last year, we started with about 3,000 vacancies among support staff. Those are our bus drivers, our cafeteria workers, our custodians, our paraprofessionals, the folks who work in the classroom side by side with the teachers, with some of our with some of our students with special needs, right? And so last year we had about 3,000 vacancies. This year, about 6,000 vacancies among our support staff. So what's happening in Florida right now is having a really far-reaching and, quite honestly, damaging effect on our kids in a very real way, right? Like, even if people don't think that, that stuff is, that some of the stuff that has happened, being said to happen in our schools is happening or not, this or impacts them. Maybe it's a family in a more affluent community, and they're like, I don't have to worry about all this nonsense the governor's talking about. It actually is having an impact because people are walking away from the profession faster than any of us could have ever imagined. And even now, Florida started the school year 2 weeks ago. We are 2 weeks into the school year in Florida. And 2 weeks in, we still have more than 2,000 vacancies among our teachers and more than 2,000 vacancies among our support staff, more than what we had last year at this point. So we are in a crisis mode for sure. And so when we talk about the tone and the tenor, what a lot of this gets at, not only is there an attempt to limit what we teach in the classroom, there's an attempt to completely impugn the integrity of teachers and staff in the state of Florida. There's this attempt to drive a wedge between parents and teachers, between families and schools. And, and what do I mean by that? Pete, as a parent, you, like me, I'm sure, go to open house at the beginning of the year. You go to open house at the beginning of the year because you want to know what your kid's going to be doing in school. You want to meet the teachers who are going to be teaching them. You want to exchange phone numbers and emails. So if there's a concern, a problem, you know how to get a hold of them. They know how to get a hold of you. That's what open house is about at the beginning of the year. And then throughout the year, you check in. You probably check your daughter's gradebook, online gradebook, to see how their grades are. You ask them questions when they come home. I know you talk about this a lot on your show. You do it. I do it with my youngest, who's still in school. I picked her up yesterday from middle school on the way to dance. What did we talk about? She went period by period telling me everything she did in class, what she's working on, what's happening. And we do that as parents because we are very much a part of the public schools. Parents are public schools as much as teachers and staff and administrators, all working together to make sure every child is getting the education they deserve and need. And so when we see this assault on our public schools, it's an assault on us too, right? It's an assault on our family. When we hear the governor of the state of Florida or others talk about parental rights, those parental rights are not parental rights for everyone, right? Let's be clear on that. This isn't parental rights for everyone, because you're in a position, Pete, where you have the flexibility in your schedule that you can go to your daughter's school. You can go out there and you can say to the teachers at your daughter's schools, to the administrators, hey, what's going on here? What's happening? I want to know. There are parents out there that are working 2 and 3 jobs. They leave before their kid goes to school. They get home after their kid has gone to sleep. They're doing the best they can. Who's making sure that their rights are being respected and honored? It's the collective of us that have to do that.
Well, I'll say another word about that phrase, parental rights, because that is part of the right-wing playbook playing out across the country. I heard it at our board meetings. The way I've been saying it, and I need your help with how to punch it up, is we have tons of parental rights, tons of them. You mentioned open house, parent teacher. I have email relationships with most of the girls. You can volunteer. There's so many things you can do. Your kid teachers will always get back to you. But I say the parental rights are limited. You don't get to tell the teacher what to teach or how to teach. They're happy to have a conversation, but there's curriculum, there's master's degrees, there's expertise. And obviously you wouldn't want somebody coming to you at your job and telling you how to do it. But that phrase is very effective. I'm sure it's been focus group, parental rights, not so many of these other terms that we've had to now deal with and address as well. But say another word about how that gets defined by these parents who, really think they should be in charge of the school, even though, by the way, they don't even use the parental rights, access to parental rights that they have. They don't even go, half of them, to the parent-teacher conference. They don't even know their kids' teacher's name. I'm not going to generalize about everybody, but a lot of them that are screaming don't use the rights they have, and they want, quote, more.
Well, so listen, here in Florida right now, if you're a parent and you've gone to open house, you know or you talk to your kids, whatever it may be, right? You read the stuff that comes home from school and you see that your child is going to be reading a book you don't want them to read. So let's say you don't want them reading To Kill a Mockingbird for whatever reason. In Florida, you can say, I don't want my child reading that book. Can you give them an alternative assignment? And in every school district in Florida, they will get an alternative assignment. What we're seeing in Florida, there's 3 major bills that passed last year as part of the governor's initiative to really undermine public education, and really has been an affront to those of us who work in the field, because it's making assertions that we're doing these horrific things that we're not in our public schools, right? And so what I will say is that one of the bills, House Bill 1467, was a bill that allows for the banning of books. And it allows anyone, even people who don't have kids in the public schools, to demand to see every book that exists in that school. So schools have to now list every book. Now,
and then take one sentence from that book
and say, well, yeah, but they can say, I don't like that book. I want that book banned. I'm a parent. I'm a parent who's a white Jewish guy married to an African-American Christian. We have biracial children. We have children who are raised understanding both religions. And so, are they talking about my kids? Because I have a feeling there are people out there who may object to that, and may say there shouldn't be books in school that talk about biracial kids, right? Just like there are people out there saying there shouldn't be books in school that talk about the LGBTQ plus community. And there shouldn't be books in schools that teach or that express an ideal that they disagree with. Yeah. And so the issue I have with that is, one, it's not American. Like, let's start with that. For people who play the patriotism card all the time, it's not American to ban books. Like, that was done by Hitler. That was done by the Nazi regime. It's not American to ban books. And here's the thing. If you don't want your kid reading that book, they don't have to. But you shouldn't be able to say, so I'm going to exclude anyone from reading that book. But literally, teachers in the state of Florida right now, as they came back to school, in some districts were told they couldn't have scholastic book fairs at their school right now because we don't know how we're going to give parents permission that any book their child might buy is okay with the parent before they buy that book. Or another one was we had another district where teachers were told they had to go through every library book they have in their classroom library. So keep in mind, this is more of an elementary issue, but you have elementary teachers, some who've been teaching for 20, 30 years, who haven't walked out of the profession yet, may have 1,000 books in their classroom because they've collected them. They bought them out of their own pocket and collected them over the years. And so they have all these books, and they're saying, go through and you need to write down the title of every book in your classroom. You need to tell us that you reviewed it and that it's compliant with state laws, and we don't have rules yet to implement these state laws. And you have to sign off that everything's okay. Or they tell them, or you can take all your books home. Could you imagine if teachers take all their books home, there's no books for kids to read? Like, we don't give a lot of books in our schools like we should, especially here in the state of Florida, because they're so underfunded. And yet that's the kind of stuff teachers are spending their time on. Want to know why they're leaving the profession?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, that's what I wanted to specifically ask you. There's a litany of reasons. See, salaries have always been an issue. What's changing now in your state of Florida, and how are you addressing that teacher shortage there? I mean, I don't even know how you sleep at night being the head of this the largest teachers union, education union, when you have the issue is having warm bodies. Now they're talking about lowering standards. What's changed?
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute. So the American Federation of Teachers, one of our national unions, did a poll of members across the nation. This was a nationwide poll. and they asked those who work in education, the greatest professions in the world, the most important professions in the world, I would argue, because they allow all other professions to exist, right? They asked them, oh, how satisfied are you with your job right now? 80%, 80% of teachers and staff in our schools in the nation right now are dissatisfied with their job. 80%, 46% extremely dissatisfied. Again, greatest professions in the world, 46% extremely dissatisfied with their job right now. So they asked why. Number one, low pay. Number two, lack of respect. Number three, the teacher and staff shortages that exist. Because as anyone listening would know, if you work somewhere and people don't show up to work one day, who's picking up all the slack? You are. So imagine there's no one there to show up to work. And people are experiencing this in other industries now. That drives it as well. So I want to go back to the teacher pay issue for a minute, because in Florida in particular, we've had the worst policy around teacher pay for the last 12 years. And I can give real statistics on this. In 2010, in the state of Florida, there was one law that governed teacher pay in the state, and it was our right to bargain. And Florida's teachers ranked 36th in the nation in average teacher pay. Today, in the state of Florida, there are over 20 laws that govern teacher pay, and Florida ranks 48th in the nation in average teacher pay.
Oh, boy.
And so let me add a little bit more to this as well, because when you look at those 20 laws in the state of Florida, we now call that the teacher experience penalty. And what does that mean? It means these laws, as a collective in the state of Florida, the longer you teach, the more experience you have, the smaller your pay increases are, to an extent where literally in the state of Florida today, there are teachers with 20, 25, 30 years of experience who are making less today in real dollars than their counterparts did 10, 12, 15 years ago. In fact, a teacher came to me recently, 25 years of teaching, 25 years in a district. And they've been in the same district their whole career, 25 years. They're making $52,000 a year. They went back and looked at a salary schedule in that district from 2008, 2009, and they looked at a 25-year teacher. And a 25-year teacher back then was making $59,000 a year, $7,000 more than they are today with the exact same experience. That is what these laws did in the state of Florida. That is why we're seeing an extreme exodus, because pay is so bad and we have bad policy. I'll go one step further. Another thing that changed in 2010, teachers in Florida had what was referred to as continuing contract, a form of tenure, job protection, meaning if you stand up for kids, no one's coming behind you saying you're out of a job. Well, today that doesn't exist anymore in Florida. They don't have those job protections. And so it's very difficult to do the job you should be doing without the fear that you will be threatened with job loss. And again, you're paid so poorly. It's
if I didn't know these actual teachers myself personally from having met them, thanks to you so many times coming down there and hanging out and speaking with them, I would ask, why do they stay? Like the question is, if your job security is a question, if your salaries are so insulting, and as well as the benefits, and if the job itself is being made so much more difficult, like the question you must struggle with is just begging people to stay on. And you want to think it's that there's still a reward there, but man, if the costs outweigh the benefits, whether they be however you want to measure them, from salary to the way you feel when you wake up in the morning headed into that building, not to mention, real concerns about security now with shootings and so on. I mean, it's just, why stay? What do people say?
Yeah. So here's the thing. The AFT survey also asked that question. And what they found was that we're optimists in the teaching and education world, right? Mm-hmm. We think things are going to get better. We hope that things are going to get better. We need things to get better. Yeah. And so among teachers and staff in our schools, they believe things will get better, and they don't want to give up. I'll tell you another motivator for me, quite honestly, is the opposition wants it this way. Like the opposition wants people giving up. They want them walking out of the profession. In Florida, in 1998, was the year they started and passed legislation to begin vouchers and charters in the state of Florida. And in 1998, 90% of students attended Florida's public schools, 90% in 1998. So Pete, here we are 24 years later. And we have had laws every year that incentivized vouchers and charters in the state of Florida. We have had laws that have made it harder and harder for public schools. What percent do you think are in public schools today, students in the state of Florida?
Oh my God. It's probably half that.
90%. 90% of students today are still in Florida's public schools. You know why? Because parents love their neighborhood public school. Right? Parents want their kids in the public schools because that's where childhood happens. That's where community happens. That's where we connect. So public schools are the place where kids should be getting their education. And listen, the opposition is not pleased with those numbers. And so I think that's what this is about. I think this is an attempt. You know, they use the mask mandate situation. They use COVID as an opportunity to try to divide and separate us, but we can't let them be successful. So as you said, today is primary election day. I know while we're recording this and we'll have the outcome when people are listening to it, but I hope the outcome is similar to what you guys saw in New York in your school board elections, that people reject the attempt to divide. They reject this attempt to put a wedge between parents and teachers, this attempt to create distrust and impugn the character of teachers. Look, we have a governor in the state of Florida who literally every day is making some other offhanded negative comment towards teachers and staff who work in our schools. He is maligning them daily. He is vilifying them. And why? These are people who care. You know why I went into teaching? I went into teaching because at a young age, I started playing the violin and I loved music and I loved my teachers and they inspired me. And I said, I want to do that. And I want to share that love of music back. And you talk to any teacher, you'll hear a story very similar to that they were inspired by a teacher, by a coach, by someone who said to them, spoke to their inner self and said, you've got to give back in some way. You've got to help the next generation. You've got to share your love with others. And that's why we become teachers. And it's really hard when people who have that kind of passion and commitment walk away from the profession, which is why it takes a long time for them to do something like that.
So very little triggers me more, offends me more than teachers being criticized. It's so easy to criticize anybody. You can always find a bad teacher if you wanted to. But gosh, the vast majority of this profession, unlike a lot of other professions, are such amazing people doing it for such the right reasons and often, unfortunately, leaving for some of the right reasons, too. So what do you do, in terms of solutions here? You've been in this fight for a very long time, and it's always been about the same kind of ideology of destroying public education. And they've tried everything they can. And they've been successful in some ways, and because of people like you, they failed. But what is the political landscape right now? Because that's always been the issue. You've got to get policymakers in office at the state level, much less the national level, that respect and care about public education and realize everything that you just said, and that public education built this country. So what are we doing? I mean, what's the landscape down there? I mean, I've talked with experts about the gerrymandered districts and obviously about the kind of the making it harder for certain constituencies, demographics to vote. Obviously, what's the landscape like right now? I hear that DeSantis, it's possible that he might not win re-election in his own state, much less run for president. What's the landscape? What do we need to know? And how can those of us who aren't in Florida support those of you who are in the fight?
Yeah, so first, let me start with this. Public education is a nonpartisan issue. I know people are trying to make it political. They're trying to make it partisan. But from a voter perspective, from an individual perspective, it's a nonpartisan issue. And here's what we've surveyed folks. Like when we've surveyed here in Florida, 90% of Republicans in the state of Florida want strong public schools, and 89% of Democrats want strong public schools. Wow. In other words, it's a statistical tie. They all want strong public schools. And so the issue I think we struggle on is how do we talk about public schools and how do we create pressure for the policymakers, because again, we're talking about bad policy that has been in place here for at least 12 years for as it relates to teachers and staff in our schools, for 24 years as it relates to public education in general. We've had bad policy decisions. And what we haven't done is we haven't created a scenario, a force in which it doesn't matter someone's political party, you can't vote against public education. Like, that's what we've got to create. So the first thing we got to do, again, on primary election day, vote. Ask, and I've said this in every interview I've done here in Florida. I've said this to all our members and in public speaking events. Everyone should ask anyone running for office, whether it's school board, state house, state senate, the governor's race, whatever it might be. Everyone should ask, what are you going to do, Mr. or Miss Candidate, to address the massive teacher and staff shortage? And if they're not talking about investing in our schools, if they're not talking about increasing pay for teachers and staff, if they're not talking about respecting the professionals and allowing them to be the professionals they are, trusting them more, if they're not talking about addressing the fact that so few young people are going to college to be teachers, then don't vote for them. Because all these other issues that are serious issues now that they are really implementing in our schools, the CRT, the don't say gay, all those kinds of issues, while important, those are secondary. We've got to fight back against them, right? Don't get me wrong on that. But if they're talking about that as a divider and as the things they want to focus on, then they're not focused on the right issues. The right issues are, we've got to have people in the school.
Yes, so well said. Absolutely. They're all red herrings. They're all distractions from the simple fact of having, good people, qualified people. What is this talk of lowering standards to become a teacher in Florida? And that doesn't help.
We've seen it in other states too, right? Yeah. This idea where they're saying you don't need a bachelor's degree, you don't need education experience to be a teacher. I put out a TikTok the other day. Anyone on TikTok? I also shared it on Facebook as well. But you can go to my TikTok, Andrew Spar on TikTok, and this video is a video of a superintendent in Bay County, Florida, a very rural part of Florida, Panama City area. And he was at the State Board of Education meeting, and he had talked about how there were 10 teachers who quit in the first week of the school year. And one of the State Board of Education members asked him why they quit. And he started out with the simple thing that they had no formal education experience and teaching is hard. And of course, I put that video out there and I contrasted it with what the governor said. And the governor said, he is underwhelmed by teachers who go through education programs. So teachers who are fully prepared to be in the classroom, which it's hard even when you're fully prepared. I want to be clear. Yes. Teaching is really, really
And
hard.
If you don't believe that, go volunteer at your kid's school and try to get their attention. Try to get them to pay attention to you for 5 minutes. And if you don't want to kill a kid, then then stop blaming teachers. It's a ridiculously challenging walk. 5 minutes in their shoes. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And so I put that out there to make that point. You can't just say anyone come in and be a teacher.
Right.
First of all, people who become teachers are people who usually have a passion to work with kids. They love kids. They welcome kids. They want to help every child. This is not a cush job, right? By any stretch of the imagination. And two, these are people who have a skill set. They have been properly trained. They understand pedagogy, which I just said a word that some people won't know what that is, but they understand the content. They understand the skill set it takes to be a teacher, and they've been trained. And look, even with all the training, I became a teacher. I went through the music education program at The Ohio State University, a great school, got a great education there. I walked into the classroom. And the first 3 years I taught, I pity those kids because I was still learning, right? I was still honing my craft as a teacher. And I watched a teacher the other day who did a TED Talk from Miami, and she was talking about after 10 years, she thought she knew it all. And then she gave her kids an assignment that changed her view of teaching altogether again. Because as teachers, we never stop growing. We never stop learning. We never stop improving and honing our craft, largely because the kids are always, changing. Our environment's always changing. How we interact. Every year, it's a different class. You learn something new.
Certainly the past 2 years, the adaptations adaptations that teachers, much as students, and administrators have had to make because of COVID protocols has been, nothing short of amazing. And those people who criticize, including the administrators, about, the COVID protocols are such assholes because there's nothing in your master's degree, whether it be at the Ohio State or anything else, how to deal with the pandemic. There was no playbook, and everybody's been doing the best they can. And it really has always bothered me so much. By the way, your old stomping grounds there, I saw your tweet, apparently the Columbus, Ohio teachers, is that right? Is that the Ohio State?
The Columbus Education Association.
They've gone on strike like the first week of school for some of the reasons we've talked about, and you're showing support for them. That must be a very tough decision, certainly in this climate where teachers are losing respect for all the ridiculous lies that are being told about them, to go on strike the first week of school. Some people might say, well, that's not going to make your reputation any better. But their argument is, do you want your kids to have a good education? Then you better pay attention to us and give us, because otherwise they're just not going to. Someone's got to do the job. What's going on there? Why are you supporting them?
Yeah, look, the number one issue in Columbus right now is the condition of the schools. They're fighting for kids to be in safe, healthy conditions with air conditioning. So being in Florida, I grew up in New York. I know not everyone has air conditioning up north, but as climate change continues to happen, as summers and days get longer and hotter, here in Florida, we have air conditioning in every school. And to think that in Columbus, Ohio, they do not have air conditioning in every school. They do not have schools that are in the best of condition. And that's the number one thing they're fighting for, along with, some of the other issues as it relates to making sure they have teachers and staff in their schools, making sure kids have access to the arts and to physical education. Those are important issues. Those are issues parents want too. So again, as some try to cast it as this divide between the teachers and staff and the parents, it's not. And this is really people standing up saying to the policymakers, to the politicians, enough politicking in our schools. Get the job done. And that's what we really all need to say to every politician. Enough of the politics. Get the frickin' job done. Help our kids. Make sure they have a better education than the generation before them. Not a worse education, a better education. Let's continue to grow as a society. I want to end with this, Pete, because I know we're out of time, but as Americans, we value the freedom of thought. We value the freedom to make decisions. We value the freedom to learn what we want to learn. And we value the ability to debate and discuss issues that we agree with. What we're seeing happening here in Florida, Texas, and other places is an attempt to block that, is an attempt to shut that down, to ban books, to ban discussions, to ban different thought. That's not what we stand for. And they're doing it under the guise that colleges and universities and schools are these liberal bastions. No, we're places where we encourage free thought. Every other country in the world looks to the United States and asks, how do you teach creative thinking? How do you teach entrepreneurship and ingenuity? How do you teach problem solving? Because of America, that is a place we've led the world. And we're about to lose it because of politicians who have a political agenda, who aren't looking out for the best interests of our children and the future of our communities. They're the ones driving this agenda, and they're doing it based on fear and on false statements and on falsehoods. That's what we should push back against. And as a society, that's what we need to push back against.
So well said. I'm so glad you are in the position that you're in, leading the way that you always do. And I always appreciate when we talk. You give me a lot of hope and inspiration, as always. And I'm very grateful for the time. I know that you're super busy putting out fires your whole entire career. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Good luck today at the polls.
Thanks.
We're rooting for you, and we'll talk soon, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Pete. Thank you.
All right, there he goes, Andrew Spar. So great talking with Andrew Spar. I love that dude. He is brilliant and inspiring. Andrew Spar, FEA. Follow him. Let him know that you heard him on today's podcast. That'll mean a lot to me and definitely to him as well. And good luck down there, everybody down there in Florida with the public schools. And obviously, if you're a teacher or any adult working in those buildings, you guys are the greatest. And thank you very much for all that you do. All right, well, Coming up, Bill B, Bill Boyle. Oh, this is a good conversation. As always, I loved our talk. I do want to tell you real quick about Indeed.com. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. The only job site where you only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. So if you are looking for new talent at your firm, at your company, at your business, then instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, use Indeed. They are a powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. They have all kinds of awesome tools right there at Indeed.com/stand-up. And if you go right now, you can get a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/stand-up. But that offer is only good for a limited time. So claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/stand-up. Indeed.com/stand-up. Terms and conditions do apply. I wonder if Bill Boyle has ever used Indeed.com/stand-up to hire anybody at one of his many parking garages in Washington, D.C., because that's really what he does. He's like a business owner. He's a businessman. But he's also schmoozing with people all the time for that business, and he's just a very well-read student of history, student of politics, student of life. He makes for a perfect guest here on the show. Started as a caller, the old show. Used to call in, and we'd let him go for as long as he wanted because we thought it always had a thoughtful contribution to our conversation. And so when I started doing the podcast, I thought, well, we could make him a regular. Other guests who listen to the show, like John Donvan, love Bill Boyle. So, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, my good friend down in Washington, D.C., he's also really great on Twitter. You should follow him there, at Bill B in D.C. That's his actual Twitter handle. You can say hi to him. Let's do it, Bill. I gave him a call a couple days ago. How are you?
I'm good. I have a little bit of a cold. I made it all the way through Europe without getting sick, and then got sick 2 days after I got back, which is awesome.
I wanted to hear on the record about your trip. Why did you go where you went, and how was it?
So I flew to Berlin and then drove through Nuremberg, Weimar, down into the Alps, and then I swung back up to Prague. And I basically did it because I'd never been to Germany or Czech Republic. And it was sort of a gap in my travel education, you could say. And it was also easy. It's like an easy trip to do in the era of COVID. You're not worried about visas. You're not worried about health issues at all when you're there, So it was just a solid, easy trip in a place I'd never been. So,
when you say you're not worried about health issues, that's because of your perspective, having had issues in other places that you've gone, like Southeast Asia 2 years ago or 3 years ago, right? Like your wife got, what's it called, dengue or whatever? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't really. I'm not worried about getting sick in Vietnam or my wife. If we'd really had a serious issue, we would have been able to get help very easily. It's more like, I don't want to go somewhere where I'm going to get stuck if somebody gets sick, right? I didn't want to be spending 2 weeks in Tokyo at the end of my trip in quarantine.
Right.
So it was easy in the sense that, there wasn't the restrictions are low. It's easy to get back to the U.S. from there, all that kind of stuff.
Got it. So you'd never been to Germany or the Czech Republic. So what did you want to see? What did you see? I know you went to, what do they call them? Former concentration camps. Is that what they call them?
They call them concentration camps. Yeah.
Yeah. But they're now like national, kind of memorials, I guess, right? You can't like, in America, you can get married at a plantation. You can't get married at a,
you probably could get married at a concentration camp. I'm sure that the German secret police would then investigate you thoroughly right after that. But we went to Buchenwald, which is not one of the more elaborate sort of, recreations of the experience, but its starkness was really impressive and intense. They do just enough, and you really, you see, there's plaques that tell you what happened on the spot you're standing on, that sort of thing. Really pretty intense stuff, and the Germans take it very seriously. They want you to know that they did it and it's their fault, and that this needs to be remembered. I will give them credit. They do not shy away from their responsibility, not at all. Actually, what was interesting about Buchenwald is you see lots of references to the Red Army and their role in ending the Nazi scourge, basically. And Buchenwald, I believe, was in what would have been East Germany back in the day. And it feels sort of out of place now when you see this, in Kamiya to the Red Army having saved Germany. You're like, sure. It's a good example of how time changes perspective on things, for sure.
Well, time changes alliances and views, and I mean, you're making reference to World War II, Soviets, and current day Russia, right?
Yeah, and
vis-a-vis
anniversary of the
European aggression,
of the Soviet Pact right now. Actually,
what did that accomplish? The Soviet Pact?
And the Nazi-Soviet Pact was the deal that Hitler made with Stalin, where Germany would get most of Poland and the Baltic states. Russia would get Bessarabia, which is what we know of as Moldova now, and the eastern slice of Poland that they wanted. So it was an alliance between the Soviets and the Nazis that lasted up until the Nazis decided to invade Russia.
What happened there? Do you know? I mean, like, why did that pact get broken? Why did Hitler? I mean, it seemed like that was probably his biggest mistake.
Well, he was driven by ideology always. And in his ideology, the Bolsheviks were the absolute worst and needed to be destroyed. And the Germans needed Lebensraum, meaning living room, in Eastern Europe for German colonists. And Russia was always the Soviets, the Bolsheviks, the Russians, they were always the main enemy for him. He saw them as subhuman in ways that he didn't see the British, for instance. So, there was a fantasy amongst the Nazis, which was encouraged, by the way, by people like Chamberlain and the appeasers, that they were all shoulder to shoulder against Bolshevism. So he was always going to attack Russia. The real story there is not that the Germans did something surprising. It's that Stalin managed to talk himself into the idea that they were going to stick to the treaty. And that's more on Stalin than on Hitler. I mean, it was obvious to anyone who really was paying attention that was not going to last.
Is there any other way to describe your feelings, your emotions, your experience? Did you bring the boy, your son?
I did. I brought the boy. I don't have a policy of shielding him from much.
Yeah, I figured. I just wasn't. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. It's okay for him to see things. And I think we went to another museum in Berlin where he saw some pretty graphic pictures of how people were treated by the Nazis, at the selection in the camps. And that was pretty gruesome graphic stuff that he saw, here and there. And, he's 10, he's heard about it. And I think it's not bad, as long as you don't overdo it, to let a kid see that sort of thing. It really, sinks in. And of course, from his perspective as well, let's be honest. He's like, oh, Jesus Christ, this is like Dad's history trip.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it finally something needed to curb your son's anti-Semitism. I hope this did it the way. Remember when Marjorie Taylor Greene went to the Holocaust Museum and came out to like a podium? Was like, wow, I had no idea how bad the Holocaust was. And then like the next day, she just started being anti-Semitic again. Reverted,
to her normal setting. Yeah.
All right, enough about her. But yeah, so. My question was just anything that, like, you're such obviously a history nerd and we love talking to you about it. You're so great at sharing what you know and what you've learned. Was there anything you didn't know or anything that you did know that just had, a different kind of impact? Like, what was it like?
I mean, I didn't really learn a lot. We went to another trip where you go under the Berlin Wall, where it had been, to where people had done tunnels. Oh. And, it's one thing to read about it. It's very different to actually physically see it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And I was really struck by how much of sort of the main center of Berlin was part of East Berlin. I didn't realize how, what you think of as Berlin was almost all on the Soviet side. And Berlin's an interesting place. It's not really Germany, because Berlin was isolated in the western half. On the eastern half, it was depopulated to a great degree by people crossing over and leaving for the Federal Republic of Germany. There aren't a lot of Berliners around whose families were there in 1942. So it's kind of a clean slate that's been swept off, and now it's an extremely diverse, extremely cosmopolitan place. A very, very, very strong Turkish element. One thing my wife and I discovered, by the way, is that there are Vietnamese people everywhere, which is kind of astonishing. I mean, everywhere.
They seem like I'm not even going to generalize. You just heard you heard maybe about my interview with Matthew. Jesus, it was only a week ago, but I took a week off. Such a great book. He's talking about the Vietnamese refugees that landed in Texas and became shrimp fishermen and were targeted as a result. And what is it about the Vietnamese people specifically that makes them so unafraid to go anywhere and do anything, I wonder?
Yeah, it really...
Bill's wife is a Vietnamese American, in case anybody doesn't know, which is why he's so knowledgeable. Sorry.
Right. No, so what's interesting is that in the way that there's going to be that there is an Irish bar everywhere you go in the world, including, as I understand it, Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, there will also be a Vietnamese pho place everywhere you go. And I'm not kidding you. We saw them in Prague. We saw them in 4 different cities in Germany. I mean, we even stayed in a Vietnamese hotel one night. Like, it's insane. They are doing what the Irish did. They're just blasting through the world and showing up everywhere that tourists or, cities are. It's kind of fascinating. It's a globalization story that, we think of the Vietnamese as just coming to America at the end of the war. But, you go all over, and it was kind of insane how often we ran into them. I had 3 different Vietnamese meals while I was in Germany.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. But it definitely, one thing I will say about Germany, a couple conversations, people talked about how embarrassed they were about their reactions and sort of approach as a country to Russia and Ukraine. Another thing you see in Germany is you see everyone is trying to get firewood.
Well, hold on. Let's take those separately. They're quite different things, and I'd love to hear more about what kind of conversations that you had with Germans. But you're talking about the current day German reaction to the current day Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Yep.
Well, take us through. Most of us, including me, have no idea what their original or initial reaction was to it, and some people paying a little attention, like myself, know about the relationship between the countries today and commerce and natural gas and energy issues there, obviously. But what do we need to know first before you talk to us about what they've, it sounds like, pivot or had a reversal on or an enlightening of?
They're in the middle of that reversal. They're not all the way there yet. And, what Germany did basically was supercharge its economy by using really cheap Russian gasoline and oil. And the deal they thought they were making was that they would be a great customer, and then Russia would not want to invade their neighbors and threaten Europe or the European settlement post-World War II, post-Cold War, really. And that turned out to be a bad bet. The Russians don't give a shit about that and didn't give a shit about that and decided to have a war in Ukraine. So for the Germans, basically their Ostpolitik, their political approach to foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia going back 50 years turned out to be completely wrong. And Russia instead, blew up the deal and started attacking their neighbors. And what that has done is put the Germans in a really weird position because they were very smug about how the U.S. was too militant, about how Britain was too militant, and about how we all just talk this through, it's going to work out okay. And that, of course, turned out to be completely wrong. They were dealing with mobsters, not with statesmen. Right. In Russia.
Right. It's such an important point. Mobsters, not statesmen. We've seen them throughout history, but specifically it's a great... Go ahead.
Well, right. And so now they're coming to terms with this. And where this gets complicated is that the Germans have a real and legitimate fear of becoming a big military power again. Right? They go to Buchenwald when they're in grammar school. Right? They go to... They're taught every year that, Germany and jackboots is real dangerous both to Germans and everybody else. So they had a lot of mishigas, a lot of confliction in themselves about whether it's a good idea or not to get involved in this war. And, as I said to the one German guy I was talking to, I said, look, I get it. I said, this is one American who's not looking at you and going, oh, what assholes. Because I get it. You guys were the evil empire, and you're terrified of getting pulled into that again. And he said, I appreciate that. He's like, I don't necessarily agree with you. I think we should be doing a lot more. But he's like, that is exactly what's happening. People are terrified of themselves. And I think in a big power, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's bad in policy terms vis-a-vis Ukraine. But, the Germans learned a very bitter lesson, and luckily for everyone, they haven't unlearned it in the last 50 years or 70 years.
Well, a certain maybe percentage of Germans, not unlike Americans, have either never learned it or did unlearn it. There's a frighteningly large movement in Germany of Nazism, of white ring fascists.
They exist, but they're mostly in the former East Germany, and they're certainly nowhere close to winning power anywhere.
Are there none in parliament?
The AfD was that party, and they've gone down to like 2%.
Is that right? Okay. Well,
they're the wave of right wing European populism outside of France really peaked a couple of years ago.
It's pretty bad in Italy right now, I think.
Yeah, but even, weirdly enough, even that party, which is directly descended, by the way, from Mussolini's party, they're in favor of kicking the crap out of the Russians too. Right?
Yeah, but they're also in favor of, I'm saying, right, on Russia, okay, they might be right, but they're also in favor of kicking the crap out of refugees from Northern Africa, which threaten their culture.
They're an outlier. I mean, if you look at Czech Republic, there's now a liberal government. Same with Romania, same with Moldova. The Polish government certainly has veered back left after recent events. There's just Slovakia has more liberal government now. I mean, things are heading in a better direction than they were. And Germany is a big example of that. I mean, in Germany, the most interesting thing is that the Greens, who are the environmental party, they are the party that really wants to kick Putin's ass. And they are left-wing by any definition. But they're left-wing in the sense that we believe in people who believe in democracy. Putin obviously wants to destroy it.
Why is that interesting that the left-wing environmental movement in Germany opposes the Russians? Because leftists sometimes side with communists?
Because they tend to side against the U.S. That's in Europe in particular, and particularly in Germany. The default position was always that the U.S. is kind of, we were the bully they could see, right? We weren't over a border somewhere. We had, military bases down the street, and so there was always sort of we were the guys that, and you could also safely give us shit, and no one was going to shoot you for it. And what's changed, it's interesting in Germany, is that those folks who used to, they would have been the people protesting against intermediate nuclear missiles in the 80s. They're now saying, bring the Americans in, give more aid to the Ukrainians.
Yeah, but let me just try to split the hair there, just to be clear. I mean, you said they're not usually one to side with the U.S., but they're really siding with Ukraine, as is the rest of the world, and so is the U.S., and obviously the biggest supporter probably financially. But, I mean, when it comes to Iraq or even Vietnam, I'm sure that's what you were more likely referring to, or all the other conflicts and the military expansion that you're referring to.
What it comes down to is that their priority has changed, in a good way, by the way. The priority is no longer, are we going to be, their priority is, let's look at who is doing the most damage right now.
Yeah, the world has changed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the left in the U.S., as you know, who are not very happy with what we're doing in Ukraine. Right. I mean, of the farther left, not the.
That's hard to know. I'm honestly not paying that much attention. And if I am, it's mostly like the media types, like where is Sam Cedar is generally where I am on the left or something like that. But certainly, yeah, my brother does not like it. My brother's very opposed to this. He is of the left. He's opposed to America's support of Ukraine because he thinks it's going to maybe prolong it and make it that much worse. And in the end, more people will die. The kind of point of view that you've criticized, of course.
Well, I won't mess with your brother. He scares me. But
yeah, he should. He should. He should
no,
be.
It is. Yeah, and people on your show have certainly heard my take on that approach to it. But it is. I think we're in an age of position ferment where left and right is getting really sort of mixed up, and there's going to be a new it's going to gel as something very different in the next 5 years.
I'll take the bait. In America, you mean the left and right in America?
Yeah, I mean, look at how Republicans are trying to become the working class blue collar party, for instance. Look at how there's people on the left in the United States who are very much in favor of Ukraine, and there's people on the right who are not, right? I mean, there's a there's definitely, I mean, I'm center left myself, and I've always been sort of a Cold War guy, but never been a huge fan of big U.S. interventions anywhere. And in this case, I'm in with both feet. And a lot of people that I know, who are moderate left people are. Yeah. Then you go out to like the Jacobin people, right? The farther left folks, and they're still pro-Russia, anti-US. And they're more like actually the sort of, it's the Glenn Greenwald world where they end up being more like Tucker Carlson in the end. So I think there's a shakeup going on in people's ideological identifications, and I think it'll take a little time for that to settle out.
Well, we will see, and we will watch it along with you and your commentary along with it. I definitely wanted to ask you, of course. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to say about? I mean, by the way, I picture you. Either you have friends in the places that you went, or I'd rather this. I picture you going to a bar and just eyeing a man or woman who you might think is some type of a German scholar or diplomat or politico, and then somehow you say something impressive, maybe in some kind of broken German, and then you develop them as an asset, so you get to ask them questions about their thoughts on things, and then of course we get to benefit from those weird interactions that you had late at night in a German bar while your wife and son are in a hotel. That's how I picture it. How close am I?
Only one night. And it was early in the trip, and I was super jet lagged, and I had 3 beers and was so drunk after 3 beers I could barely talk, so I went to bed.
Wow.
Exciting, not exciting. The jet lag just killed me.
So who are the I'm sure you talked to Europeans while you were there and had thoughtful conversations. Who did you talk to? What were those conversations like? Our friend Pete Coe just got back from Scandinavia, and he made these fun segments, Annoying American and abroad, and we've been sharing them, and people like them. And also we have some other friends who've never been to Europe, and it was kind of interesting when they came back. They were terribly surprised that nobody there likes Americans. So it's always interesting to ask any American who travels abroad if they did engage in the natives, with the native people, in your case the Germans, the Deutsch. What, if anything, they learn about their views on America. Did you engage in such elementary conversation, or were you sticking to kind of highbrow history and current day type of issues?
So the Under the Berlin Wall tour that I took, the woman who taught it her family had been Latvian refugees. Then she went to college in Britain, and she was the one who did the tour. And I actually had a great conversation with her because there's a lot of walking. So, I kind of told her, hey, you're the smartest tour person I've heard so far. Like, she really had a very nuanced, very sharp take on the history she was telling us about as she walked us through it. And we had an interesting talk of being Latvian, but also having, very fluent English. She and I were comparing notes about Germans, and it was pretty funny because I said, they feel very smug, like they feel very self-satisfied, like they're very sure their way of living is the right one. At the same time, Nazism hangs over their heads. And so there's a very weird dynamic that goes on where they want to tell Americans, like, guys, you really should chill out and do X, Y, and Z. And then all you have to do is raise an eyebrow at them, and they kind of go.
You just go.
I'm not kidding. I did that to somebody. I just raised an eyebrow. As he was telling me,
two things can be correct.
No, sure,
but you're. I get
matters, right?
I get it. It's a funny, very condescending thing to do. Now, did you just? Did you ask the Latvian person about how concerned they were about Russia invading this former Soviet republic? It sounds like you were talking to other Europeans that were also in Germany about Germany.
There's millions everywhere you go. It's like here, right? I mean, everything's close, so people travel. And I didn't have a bunch of really long conversations. I had a lot of little short ones. And I got to tell you, I mean, in Germany, you see Ukrainian flags frequently. You go to Prague in Czech Republic, and I mean, there's Ukrainian flags everywhere.
Oh wow!
At the same time, I heard and saw a lot of Russian tourists in Prague. It's a very interesting mix. I mean, and in Czech Republic, I'm sure none of those Russian tourists, probably all of them, don't particularly like Putin, but it would be taking your life in your hands to whip out a Russian flag and tear down a Ukrainian one.
I thought I just read somewhere. over the weekend that there was a real divide and controversy with one or more European countries on whether or not they should let Russians come in as tourists on visas. And I'm not sure what the policy is, and I forget where it was, but you can. I don't know if that's. I don't know the even morality of such a policy.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's really hard because, folks like Julia Yaffe are profoundly against stopping them because she would say that, you get all these people are trying to flee and they're going to other countries and hearing how big, if you're a Russian tourist from Moscow and you go to Prague, you realize that the world, particularly Prague, is a great place. People are amazing. You realize people like that hate your guts. Right. And the Czechs are like inoffensive, cool people who don't bother anybody.
Wow.
And yet they raised $1 million in one day while I was there to buy drones for the Ukrainians, just in Prague. Yeah, I mean, and you can see the signage up, people saying, hey, we raised $1 million today. Fuck yeah, let's kill Russians.
Wow.
So on the one hand, there are security issues with it. I'm not sure how much you would really solve. I think the only real thing that's stopping Russians from going to Western Europe does is just to raise the pressure inside of Russia. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think I understand. I think I have a lot of sympathy with both sides.
Well, you can't just, it seems inhuman to say to a person or a family, you're not allowed to leave the country because your country is doing terrible things. Because the person would say, no, I agree with you. My country's doing terrible things. That's why I'm leaving. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be supportive. I'm scared for my own. But that's true of current day Central Americans coming to the U.S. It's true of countries all over the world. It would seem, generally speaking, that, the human rights on such an issue would be pretty clear cut. But the concern, there's always this security concern in this case, I guess. And I'm not sure what it is either, what the security concern is. But a lot of people can prove that they're leaving a country because they're being targeted or because they're afraid. It shouldn't be that hard.
So there was an explosion at a Bulgarian arms storage unit like 2 weeks ago. And then there was some Russians who were posing as bloggers, photography bloggers, were captured in Albania trying to basically break into a storage unit for ammunition that was going to Ukraine. They're claiming their innocence. That doesn't look like they're innocent. The Russians, they're the KGB, FSB, SVR, whatever you want to call it. Their various intelligence agencies working out of their embassies all got decimated across Europe 6 months ago. 400 or 500 Russian diplomats were sent home. So for the Russians, the way to get back in the game in Europe, in these states that are fighting you, is to send agents as tourists. Is it a security issue? For sure. Is it helping Putin by North Koreaizing Russia as far as this is concerned? Or is it hurting him? I don't know the answer to that. And I think it
just can't be hurting them. And then furthermore, espionage is a practice that's going to be conducted whether or not Russian tourists are allowed in the country. You know what I mean? Like they're going to find a way to conduct their intel, surveillance, espionage operations, regardless of whether or not they're there as a tourist.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they'll figure out a way to do it. I'm not so sure how much it matters at this point. I don't think a lot of people are happily taking, 10 grand in rubles from Moscow in order to spy against Ukraine. I think ideologically, it's just tough for them now that the average person thinks they're losing cause. And so, are you really going to risk your life and career for, this defunct Ottoman Empire style thing that's going on in Moscow?
All right. Well, let's move on from the issue of Russians traveling around Europe and what that means to another. I obviously wanted to talk with you, just a general conversation about where the conflict in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, lies over the past 6 weeks, much less the past 6 months. How many months has this been? Started in late February, but I've been reading a bit about it in preparation to talk with you, and it seems like some of the analysis that you've made here on the show and most recent appearances is proving to be right, at least at the moment, in terms of momentum. A lot of articles being written and talked about in terms of momentum and surprises and and actually that Ukraine might be halting Russia's advance and even, God, starting to win. And it's late summer now. And all of this stuff is something I don't want to stop talking about and learning about and following here on the podcast at least once a week. And you're such a great person to talk about it. So generally speaking, before we get to some of the specific, I mean, you can mention them, I guess, in your response here and your thoughts. But where are we at right now with Russia's invasion in Ukraine, the war?
So basically, a good way to look at where we're at is that the Ukrainians have admitted to this week about 10,000 casualties. Russia has admitted to close to, I think, 46,000 casualties. The sort of estimates based
crazy. 20,000 dead, I think. You're saying casualties, but 20,000 dead Russians in 6 months.
And they went in with, on paper, 190,000 men. They probably really had 150. So, and by the way, I would up the actual Russian casualties somewhere closer to 60,000. I would up the Ukrainians up to probably 15. So what you're looking at is the Russians are losing men on a 4-to-1 basis. Ukraine has a lot of men available because they can mobilize everybody because their economy's gone to shit anyway, and they're motivated to win. Right? Existential war for them. Russia is having an extraordinarily hard time getting anybody. They're actually going to prisons and taking people out of prison and putting them into units. So
they drafted people in still Ukraine, in Crimea. They actually drafted, forcing people, conscription.
Grabbed a guy as he was picking his kid up from preschool. When you're doing that, those are measures of desperation, right? You're not winning a war. You're not, you're losing 4-to-1 in manpower. They're losing on even worse ratios when it comes to equipment. And what's happening here is that Ukraine has some force multipliers that the Russians don't. Number one of which is they've got American intelligence satellites, everything else, telling them everything that's happening. Okay, so they also have American and European weaponry they don't have as much as the Russians do, but they have precision weaponry. Which means that if I'm firing my HIMARS missile, right, at your base, I can hit within 10 feet of what I want, which means I can literally hit the ammunition dump and explode 1 million rounds of ammunition you have 40 miles behind the front line.
Let me just read from the New York Times, backing up what you're saying. In the New York Times, Ukraine has been able to stymie Russia thanks in large part to weapons from the U.S., the EU, and other allies. Especially important in recent weeks have been truck-mounted rocket launchers known as HIMARS, HIMARS, whose satellite-guided missiles can travel nearly 50 miles. The U.S. has sent 16 of the launchers to Ukraine so far and helped train their crews. The HIMARS, one reason the Ukraine has been able to strike more deeply into Russian territory than before. Sorry.
That's right. And that's called deep strike capability, which means that it's like an airstrike. I'm hitting you, 40 miles behind your front line, and I'm destroying your ammunition dumps. Then this is a specific thing that illustrates the bigger problem for Russia. I hit that ammunition dump. Russia's not able to do the same to me because they don't have the precision weaponry to do it. So I can hit your ammunition dump, which means that now you have to move any of your dumps farther back. So now you're back 100 kilometers from the front. When your ammunition dump was 20 kilometers from the front, you were able to use 15 trucks to keep everybody supplied with ammunition in my area. And 2 of those trucks broke down in a week. When you're 100 kilometers behind, to keep me supplied, you need 35 trucks. And they're driving longer. There's going to be more driving at night, more accidents, whatever. You're going to lose 4 or 5 trucks in a week. And so it creates a situation where the Russians just can't keep people supplied. Right? And that has been true all the way up and down. The Russians were really moving incrementally, terribly slowly at great cost. But they were moving forward in the Donetsk until the HIMARS started hitting. And then all of a sudden you see one after the other, these enormous ammunition dumps going up. And Russia has been only able to do local attacks for 6 weeks now. And those local attacks are using up men they don't have enough of. So Russia right now is in a strategic cul-de-sac in that they can't break out. They probably don't have the ability, frankly, to supply their men 15 kilometers past the front line of where they are now. I'm not sure they're going to have the ability to supply anybody on the west side of the Dnieper River in Kherson in the next couple of weeks because those bridges have been destroyed and they're using pontoons to do it. They're in a logistical and manpower supply crunch that there's no way out of that I can see and that anyone else can see that I know. And so Ukraine, on the other hand, has more than enough men. It just got another $3 billion in long-term supplies from the U.S. It's gotten billions more in the last month. And Ukraine's going to get more precision weapons, more training, more men, more everything. Now, the one problem Ukraine has is the Russians also have satellites, not as good as ours, but still good enough to see if the Ukrainians put 200 tanks together to punch a big hole in their lines. And they can get their artillery there to deal with that if that happens. So Ukraine can't concentrate too much either. So what you're watching right now is it's somebody I know who's a military guy of some strategic genius, I would say. He calls it fog eating snow. You get a foggy day and the snow just all disappears, right? Because the fog pulls, it makes it easier for the snow to evaporate. It's the strategy of small bite, small bite, small bite until everything falls apart. And that's what's happening right now. The Russians are having to attack to maintain positions, but they don't have the strength to hold it. And the Ukrainians are just starting to starve them of ammunition, food, and logistical support. At some point, the Russians are going to break because they can't keep doing it. And because they just don't have
Which Russians are going to break? The Russian military, the Russian public, the Russian
military is going to break. At some point, it's just going to be impossible for them to hold the line they're in. And when that happens, I believe it's going to have a chain reaction effect. If the Ukrainians are able to walk through a part of the line on the west side of the Dnieper around Kherson, everyone's going to run for a bridge and a boat. And that whole front's going to collapse to the line of the river. And I think that's the likeliest thing to happen. The Ukrainians are being very smart in that they're conserving their power. Right? Have the Ukrainians done any big attacks in the last 4 months? No. Because why would you? The Russians are bleeding themselves and the Ukrainians are letting them, and they have the confidence to do it. And I think part of the reason they have the confidence to do it is I am quite sure there are rooms full of guys in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. who spend their days working up the best possible strategic moves for the Ukrainians to make. And the Ukrainians themselves are quite smart and listen to these guys. And I think that, so the Russians they're not just facing the Ukrainians. The Russians are facing all the smartest military guys related to NATO, right? And the Ukrainians are doing the fight.
Right, yeah. It's a fascinating, if it weren't so horrific, conflict playing out because of the unity amongst most of the world and the modern day warfare that is being, nobody wanted this except for Putin, but the folks like you and me and analysts are fascinated by what warfare looks like in 2022. And it's surprisingly, not that new. And at the same time, definitely very new in that tanks aren't as effective and things like that. But more specifically, there are a couple of noted events that I wanted to ask you about. There are probably many more as well, but specifically a Ukrainian offensive, I think in Crimea, and the assassination of Daria Dugina, who's described as Putin's brain's daughter. So she is the daughter of an important guy to Vladimir Putin. And my understanding is that nobody actually knows who carried this out. Right. Everybody's going to use it as a way to tell whatever narrative they want, including, I'm guessing, you, because you're going to tell me who likely it was. But, there's a lot of evidence that it was actually Russian nationals who were oppositional to Putin. But before we get to that, because that's a fascinating one, just what about, those events or any other specific events that you want to mention to articulate what we're talking about more generally, which is momentum?
Right. So Crimea we'll start with Crimea, and that was off the table for Ukrainian attacks up until a couple of weeks ago. Mostly, I think, and only because they lacked the capability. The U.S. made it clear that the Ukrainians could use our weaponry anywhere that had previously been under Ukrainian jurisdiction, right? So the Ukrainians weren't hitting there, though. And in that big base where they destroyed half of the aviation assets of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, right? I added it up. It came up to about $500 million of equipment got destroyed. Really can agree on whether it was a commando attack or whether it was a missile attack. And the Ukrainians very smartly are indicating both. So the Russians are still not sure how that attack happened. But that attack was then followed by other attacks on other large Russian installations in the Crimea and elsewhere. I think that my opinion is the Ukrainians have figured out how to add range to a missile we've given them. That would be my best guess. And what's interesting about that is that it is really a brutally bad thing in terms of propaganda for Russia. It suddenly makes this, thing they grabbed 6 or 7 years ago, this part of what had been part of Russia forever that they were taking back. And this was like, really, we're taking Crimea back. Fuck these Ukrainians. We're going to show them. Suddenly that hold looks incredibly weak. And what makes it really amazing propaganda is there were hundreds of thousands of Russian tourists on those beaches watching mushroom clouds going up just inland of them. And you don't think that all those people didn't take videos of that and send it home to Russia, right? Like before they even got to the bridge. And are you still there, Pete? By the way?
Yep. Sorry.
Cool. I just couldn't hear you. So all these people are on the beach. There's explosions going on. Imagine you're at like the Jersey Shore and Philly blows up. Are you going to think America has really got it together and is secure in the war it's fighting? No way. And so the military utility is big, and that Russia has to draw back forces now to protect what they thought was their safe hinterland. Number one, the propaganda hit's enormous because Crimea, no Russians thought Crimea was even close to near this fight. And now obviously their hold on it is more tenuous than they realized. I think in one day, 50,000 cars went from west to east over the Kerch Bridge, which is people fleeing, Russians fleeing. And I think that this gets back to what I was talking about before, about the deep strike ability the Ukrainians have. They're hitting the Russians right in the balls, really far away from the front line. And I think this is all preparation for breaking the Russian army. And it's really fascinating stuff. I mean, it's still a real mystery as to how the Ukrainians did it, whether it was special forces guys setting up timers or missiles or some combination thereof. One possibility, by the way, is that the Ukrainians were suborned elements in the Russian army who did it themselves. Yeah, and I don't know. My personal feeling is it's a combination of all of it. But it's a campaign. I mean, they've hit, by my count the other day, it was up to 12 or 13. And I was traveling. I didn't really catch all of them. So they're hitting all these places again and again. And it looks like a campaign. None of this looks isolated. This all looks like preparation for really trying to break the Russian army. And so it's pretty fascinating stuff. I mean, people watch this war, and I've already heard people say 6 months in. I think it's 6 months tomorrow, by the way. I've heard people saying like, oh, nothing seems to happen. And it's hilarious because this war has been really moving quickly. I mean, those are people who pay exclusive attention to probably American television media. They don't even look at New York Times page, I don't know, A4. Right. And, Guadalcanal took 6 months to happen. And that was one battle in World War II. I mean, it's another good point. Yeah. I mean, so people don't realize that what's happening here is actually happening quite quickly. And this is a war of attrition right now. For a war of attrition, it's going really fast. As to Dugin and Dugina, his daughter, I would say that I'm really sorry that the baby fascist is dead, but I'm really not sorry that the baby fascist is dead. And this is someone who both father and daughter overtly asked or said that Ukrainians should be exterminated. So fuck these people till the end of time. I don't care about them as people at all. They're awful. That being said, Dugin is not Putin's brain and never has been. He had some influence in the Russian military in some parts of it. His father, I want to say, or his uncle were like military intelligence guys. So he had some family connections that gave him entree, and his books are just gobbledygook of like sort of early fascism, sort of pre-Mussolini fascism is a nice way to put it. Here's NPR. She was the daughter of Alexander Dugin, who's often called Putin's brain. Dugin is a prominent Russian nationalist intellectual
whose vision of a revived Russia empire came to influence Putin's war in neighboring Ukraine. For over a decade, both father and daughter have advocated for Russia's invasion. They have said many times that Russia can only thrive if Ukraine is destroyed.
Yeah, so that NPR blurb is wrong in a couple of big ways.
Oh, wow. Look at you challenging NPR reporting. Go ahead.
I would win that argument. Bring on, I don't know who is it. I don't know who's on NPR anymore, but I'm happy to have the fight. He was not Putin's brain ever, and he's certainly not a prominent Russian voice. People in Russia don't even know who he is, really. Dugin is, who would be an equivalent of Dugin?
Karl Rove.
No, not even Dan Bongino.
Oh, well, he's
sort
pretty
of a
influential.
Second-tier Trumper would be Dugin. Okay, and maybe Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard would be a really good. There can't
be any parallel unless this person goes on TV.
He did. Okay. He did. So he was sort of in that. I'm not calling Tulsi Gabbard a fascist. I'm saying, though, in the level of influence and
she certainly sits in for one on Fox News. I mean, come on.
Well, fair enough, right? I'm just trying to be nice, but
but I used to be the guy maybe push back on your thoughts or others on Tulsi Gabbard, but I'm not that guy anymore. For God's sake, she sat in for Tucker Carlson. What does that make you?
Yeah, she sucks. She's awful. But just using her as sort of her level of influence.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Dugin's probably not even there in Russia. I don't see the utility of killing this guy or his daughter from the perspective of the government. If you're Russia and you're the FSB or the GRU, do you really want a car bomb going off in the core heartland of the country? And then you want to say, oh, the Ukrainian special forces or spies are so good they can drive all the way here, kill these people, and get away? That's ridiculous. That does not fly. That is not. Their biggest worry right now is stability. And that doesn't make things look stable. That makes things look the opposite of stable.
Right.
So if I had to guess, and it is purely a guess, I would imagine this is some sort of shabby, intra-nationalist business over money or influence or something else, where somebody settled it by putting a bomb in someone's car. Car bombing, by the way, 30 years ago was not uncommon in Russia amongst business associates who were trying to get out of contracts. And that's the way this looks to me. Look, it's there's plenty of windows in Russia. If the FSB was trying to send a message to the Russian nationalists, they would have just tossed Dugin out of a window. Right? There's no need for a big bomb to go off. A big bomb go off looks like you're losing control.
Yeah.
And so I don't buy that. Again, who knows? The Russian state and its various arms have not shown enormous competence in the last 6 months, but I just don't see this as something that is sensible. Doesn't make sense to me. And so I suspect it is something private that happened that everyone now is trying to take advantage of.
Okay, well, before I let you go, I want to ask you about your reaction to what took place here while you were gone. You reached out to me and asked me what the temperature was in the U.S. I don't know how I can possibly rate such a thing, and so it's an absurd question, but I think I was in D.C. when you weren't talking to people at Glenn Kirshner's event. But, regardless of what my reaction was, my gauge was, what are your thoughts now, having caught up on the FBI's search? And now, the latest reporting, they found another 150 documents, I guess 300 in total, that were basically national security classified. They were classified documents. And there's also the reporting most, I guess, outrageously is that Trump is known to have been looking through these documents, meaning there were actual two sources that told the New York Times that Donald Trump himself was sitting down, looking through boxes and folders and files and deciding probably what to turn in and what to keep. I mean, what is your overall reaction to the Department of Justice, the Attorney General taking this action, the FBI being doxxed and demonized by the right of all people, and of course, what it means for Trump and his future and politics in general, maybe.
Right. I mean, I have a friend who is a prominent economist in D.C. who's got this running joke where he's like, there's no way that a president of the United States can ever be indicted for anything. What happened in the last couple of weeks with Trump makes me think that Trump is dead set on proving him wrong. you want, if you're Trump, you want to make it look like you don't have any intent. You want to make it look like, oopsie daisy, it was a mistake, or I really thought it was mine, or whatever. And you want to make it look like you were basically just being cooperative and things went wrong and sorry guys, we'll fix it. He went out of his way in every possible way to show, I'm not going to say look because it doesn't look like it. He showed that he had every intent of trying to keep every document he could. And he was doing it for his own personal reasons, which, knowing him, we all assume are nefarious. Has Donald Trump ever done, has he ever seen any asset out there in the world that he had any chance of influencing that he did not try to take to use for his own personal benefit?
Right. I mean, right? Yes, no, total mafia boss.
Right.
I mean,
and so the idea that guy didn't look at those documents and think, man, I've got a fucking jail out of free card if I ever need it. Right. I can't imagine. I just can't believe he didn't. And everything that we're hearing, emphasizes that he really, he went out of his way. The big thing to me that really blows me away, his own people admitted with that John Solomon letter that came out last night, that after the first subpoena where they gave up some of the documents, or right before they gave up some of the documents, Trump went through them himself. They're telling us that he personally went through the documents.
Yeah.
That
just
is
the question
so obviously suicidal in legal terms. I think in the end, and I've thought this for a while, it's going to be impossible not to indict him. Right? It's just going to be impossible not to indict him.
Well, I don't know if I or other people, certainly legal experts are divided on that, believe that up until this, and what you're saying, kind of a humorous way, but he's trying so hard to get indicted. Like, this does seem like a pretty clear-cut issue that, more importantly, forget about the legality of it. I always think about things in terms of how they are interpreted by the general public, not necessarily the MAGA movement, although I don't know. What are they supposed to say when they find out, when we eventually find out, even more specifically, what those documents were? God, we can just guess at what they were, can't we?
Well, and you know what? It doesn't even matter what they were. The bottom line is that some of those documents were, I forget the term for it, but it's above top secret. And as president, it would have been explained to him multiple times.
I think it's bottom secret, ironically.
Yeah. The level to which they were vital to the defense of the United States. He has no leg to stand on to say he didn't know. And in fact, now we know, because we know he was going through those documents, we know he was literally like, ooh, I really want to keep this one. And the bottom line is his motivation doesn't matter. He knew, and he went out of his way to keep him anyway. Even after everyone crawled over broken glass to try to just get the documents from him. And with somebody, and it doesn't matter, by the way, if he declassified them. These documents, the ones that he has, certain of them are undeclassifiable. President can't just declassify them.
Right.
Even the ones that were declassified, if you take his bullshit argument for that, it still would have been illegal to do what they did. If you or I had done what Trump did, we would already be looking at like 30 years.
I talked with Dave Rothkopf, who named people who had done and who had been. He said, anyone from Dick Morris, Sandy Berger, David Petraeus, and Reality Winner, all of them got in trouble, varying degrees and varying offenses, of course. But yeah, you don't have to say. But what is more Trumpian than Donald Trump saying, "Those are my documents, give me them back"? That is my army, my generals, things that belong to the American people, the public, are his.
Yeah, and he has no sense that there is such a thing.
Right.
It's either it helps him or it doesn't help him.
Because he's an autocrat. Yeah.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, I do. I'm reading these things from Damon Lincoln or other people saying maybe it's going to be worse to indict Trump. No. The bottom line is, at this point, we either defend rule of law or we don't. And if we decide not to defend rule of law, then we should just expect to live in a society that resembles Russia's more than ours.
Yeah.
And I don't mean as far as like communism or anything, but a country where people with power get away with shit and people who don't.
Bill, everybody's talking about this one poll. And it's hard to believe it's an outlier just because of the questions. Who knows what they are? One NBC News poll that says the American public's the issue Americans care about the most is our democracy. And I mean, you and I have been talking about this, and I've been talking about this with so many experts here on the podcast day in and day out about this issue. And so we're obviously happy to see that more people have woken up to this. But the top issue in an NBC poll or any poll being this, and then you see the changes in polling, what seems to be some major change in terms of the swing moving away from a potential red wave to who knows. At the national level, much less the local level, you got primaries in Florida and New York today when we're talking. What do you make of that polling question and the fact that more and more people are clearly concerned about the health of our democracy, what remains of it?
I'm curious in that poll, how many of the people who answered that way are Trumpers who think that democracy is in trouble because he didn't win the last election? Right?
Oh, it's a great point. It's a great point. Never thought of that.
That's great. That's my one caveat. I do think that we should be worried about it. I think it's only rational to be worried about it right now. So that's sort of how I feel about that.
Well, I know that you feel that way. I'm saying, what do you think about the fact? I mean, you gave me one good answer right there. What do you think about the fact that so many people seem to care about it, and with that one caveat?
I mean, I think it's a big deal. I think when you have people like DeSantis saying, "I'm going to sic child services in Florida on people who sent their kid or took their kids to a drag brunch," I think that the average person goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa!" I think the average person who doesn't like drag brunch says, "Whoa." I mean, I think these guys have overreached dramatically, and I think
drag brunch.
Right.
Like, I mean, the idea they're so good and bad, and good in picking issues that nobody even knows exist, and bad that they picked them. But like when I heard that, I was like, that's a thing. Like, I didn't know that was a thing to even be remotely concerned about, much less that it was a thing.
They're great at finding the emotional button to push.
Sure. Yeah. Third trimester, late term abortion, death tax. Like, what?
And you know what, though? What's interesting about that is that they tend to also be bad at policy. Well, you saw the Democrats manage to get a change in the bill that they just got through, that Manchin helped them get through, where a couple lines in it changed the definition of carbon dioxide to a poison, which means that Supreme Court case that made it impossible for the EPA to enforce rules on car-related pollution. Now the EPA can do it.
Yep.
So while everyone's going, "Oh my God," the Democrats get a lot done on the policy side.
Yeah, no,
go
ahead. But they're good. They're good at power making. They're good at power taking. They might be terrible at policy, but they're great at power and taking power. Literally taking it, not gaining it or winning it, taking it.
Yeah, they're good at getting in, and they're bad at actually changing the direction of society. And now with
No, I'd argue they're great at changing the direction of society.
Well, that's a whole. We need another 45 minutes for that. But let me say this: I think they've overreached. And do I think that a red wave is going to happen? I still do. I think, though, that Republican gains right now, if today's the vote, I think Republican gains in the Senate are nothing to they lose a couple seats. I think in the House, they win 15 seats, which is on the low end of what they should win in this environment.
But does that give them power? Do you think the Republicans will retake the power in the House? Will Kevin McCarthy be the next speaker? Actually, he might not be, because he might not get elected.
I think he will be, actually.
They may be nominating Donald Trump to be the speaker.
I don't think that a lot of Republicans want to do the work.
Well, no. Right. Who would? Any sane person. That's why John Boehner and Paul Ryan left.
Right. Exactly. It's a shitty job, and who wants it? So I'm not convinced that I think McCarthy ends up getting it just because no one else wants it, on the one hand. And on the other hand, I think, do you want that job if you've only got an 8-seat majority? Probably not. Right? That job sucks if you're barely able to get, if you're not Nancy Pelosi, who is
that
amazing.
That job sucks if you're a Republican, because you're dealing with actual members who believe the moon is made of cheese, and you cannot convince them otherwise. And that's got to be frustrating, even though you are a huge part of is to why laying the groundwork for them even getting to Congress with your bullshit views on things.
It's just not a great job. It's a shitty job.
Yeah, but anyway, the question was, do they take back the House? Do you think? I mean, all of the analysis, the people that you've told us to trust, that I certainly generally agree with, the Cook, the what's the University of Virginia guy,
Larry
Sabato, they all say the House is still going to be, the Republicans are going to still take the House.
Yes, and I think that's right. I think it's just hard. It's hard to go against this much gravity.
There's still time. Don't give up. There's still time. There's still a chance, right? Like,
if you don't make it as hard as possible on them, you're a fool.
Yes. Yeah. Get involved at the local level, and more importantly, at the Board of Education level and all those other things. And don't want anybody to punch out.
The losses now, so that in 2 years it's easier to take everything back again.
Yeah. All right. I have to go. You have to go. I appreciate over an hour of your time, as always, my friend. And thank you very, very much. Cheers. It's great to reconnect after a few weeks.
Absolutely. And next time you're in town, give me a little more warning. I could have flown back.
He texted me and said, "Are you in my town?" That's what he wrote.
In my town. Yes.
And I was like, LBI?
No. I make no claim to anywhere else but the capital. That's it.
It is yours, as far as we're concerned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, pal.
All right. What did you think of that? I love talking to him. Such a great guy. Bill B in DC on Twitter. Go say hi and thank him for joining us. He often joins us on the Thursday night hangouts as well. You can meet him and talk to him, and we fire questions and get his take on things over there. He wasn't there last night. We missed him. But a lot of many of you were. And Ben Walter is one of them. I'm going to reach out to Ben today. He's down there in Kentucky, where he let us know it was absolutely devastated from the horrific monsoon-like drenching rains of a few weeks ago. And he was there, reminded us, as he's been working on the relief efforts there. So going to give Ben a call, and just wanted you to mention that. So if you know anybody, you keep them in mind down there, because it is far from over. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast this week. Look for me to drop something later today or tomorrow for you to listen to if you're looking for more. Have an awesome weekend. I'll be on News Nation, as I am almost every Friday night, talking about the news you missed, just some silly stories, and we have fun. We have a great panel. It's 10 o'clock with Ashley Banfield, almost every Friday night now. I've been doing that because I don't like to go anywhere, All right, that's it. Be the change you want to see in the world, folks. And John Carroll, got to call you as well today. Take it away, brother.
Stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of the stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up